Hello students and welcome again to Legacy IAS Academy. In this lecture, we are going to dissect the Supreme Court's directive on sacred groves as to what does it mean, what impact will it have on the community that protected the sacred groves, what are the rights and what it is conflicting with. We'll see everything in detail. So let's get started. So what is the news all about? So on 18th December 2024, very recently, the Supreme Court had directed the Forest Department of Rajasthan to basically map the map the entire area of the sacred grove in detail on the ground and as well as with the help of the satellite. On the ground and satellite means through satellite imaging also, plus also visit and survey the ground, and with the help of both of these things detail the sacred grove, map the sacred groves in detail. Now subsequent to that mapping, the court also directed that the Forest Department of Rajasthan should classify them as forests and notify them as community reserves under the WLPA, that is Wildlife Protection Act. So after this mapping is done, it should be notified as forests and community reserves under the Wildlife Protection Act. Now, what does this judgment do? What is happening here? See, as far as sacred groves are concerned, we'll see them in detail, but to understand it broadly, you should know that these sacred groves are considered to be sacred by certain communities, certain section of the society, and they are protected by them, they are conserved by them, and these people have the rights over these sacred groves. They have the rights. That does not mean that they exploit the sacred groves. Rather, they are the protectors. They conserve, so much so that they don't even touch it unless and until in specific cases for medicinal purposes. In certain sacred groves, you don't even pluck the fruits to eat. You will only eat those fruits that are fallen automatically on its own on the ground, and in some cases you don't touch anything at all. So this is the level of protection or care or conservation that these communities do of the sacred groves. Now what this judgment has done, basically this judgment has taken away the rights, or rights will come later, but first what it is doing is taking away these sacred groves from the community towards the protection under the name of being forest or community reserves. So it will take it away and place it in the hand of the Forest Department, in the hands of the forest and community reserves. So what will happen then? The rights of these communities over these sacred groves are going to be taken away. So let us dive deep into this judgment. Now, what are the implications? The very first implication is the conflict with the Forest Rights Act. So the Supreme Court has said that you would be placing to the Forest Department that you place it under the Wildlife Protection Act. So Wildlife Protection Act, if you see, of 1972, and how will it conflict with the Forest Rights Act? It will conflict with the Forest Rights Act because the Forest Rights Act itself was enacted in order to ensure that the Gram Sabha has the right over such areas. So it was enacted to recognize, and that is why it will contradict, to recognize and vest the forest rights with the Gram Sabha. So when under Forest Rights Act these rights are vested with the Gram Sabha, if you notify it as forest and vest it under the Wildlife Protection Act, these two acts will be under conflict. Means, will this area then be under the Gram Sabha's purview, or will it be under the Forest Department alone? So there a conflict is going to come. Many people argue that Forest Rights Act should prevail as it came at a later instance, and basically the acts keep getting amendment. The provision of this provision has come at a later instance than the Wildlife Protection Act 1972. So this should prevail as both are central government act. Now, further, there will be loss of community autonomy, of course, because this community had the overall autonomy of the sacred groves. So it is going to be lost. They were traditionally protected by the local communities, these sacred groves. Now these will be protected by the authorities, the state authorities. This will basically disrupt the conservation, not the ecological, but also, in fact, very importantly, cultural conservation practices, because not, they were protecting it ecologically, of course, but certain cultural you can say practices, rites, rituals were surrounded around these sacred groves, so that is also going to be impacted. Then you have potential erosion of traditional governance system, how you were governing the things, the area, the locality, the community, when the forest rights will be, Forest Rights Act will be superseded by Wildlife Protection Act. It remains to be seen what happens, but if it is notified and then treated by the forest authorities, then it is possible that when the people lose rights over sacred groves, they will also be ousted from the sacred groves and the surrounding regions, thereby eroding their traditional governance system. Now, if you talk about legal precedences, as I said, the Forest Right Protection Act, Wildlife Protection Act 1972, what happens is whenever a new law comes, it can supersede the old law if it is conflicting in nature, because the new statement will, if it is contradicting the earlier one, the new one should prevail. Basically, that is the thing. So here, but Supreme Court, what it has done, it has prioritized the Wildlife Protection Act over the Forest Right Act. Here it is happening the other way round. Plus, other implication, if you look at it, is also impact on the livelihood. So we talked about the ecology, we talked about the culture, which is more emotional, which is more social related, but also there will be economic repercussions wherein the livelihood of the communities which depend solely, completely on the sacred groves for their medicinal needs, natural, cultural needs, etc., will then be taken away. Okay, so what this case, or what this particular T.N. Godavarman case was, Godavarman case was all about. So what happened in this case is the Supreme Court broadened the definition of the forest. It said that the forest land should not only include the areas where you consider some amount of forest is there, but any other area which the government deems to be a forest. So not only areas understood as forest in the dictionary terms, dictionary sense. Forest means the area full of jungles, not necessarily just that, but also any area recorded as forest in the government records, regardless of the ownership. So it does not take into account who owns it, whether state owns it, non-state owns it. It is not limited to the dictionary definition. At the same time, if it is ever recorded as forest, ever means earlier it might be there, now it is not because there are no trees, whatever the reason may be, but if it ever was, then again you can consider it as forest. Okay. Now, because of this, the committee was set up, and the ruling directed the government to form expert committees to identify such areas, that fill this definition. Okay. So what has happened, since you have broadened the definition of forest, now any XYZ area will also come under forest, the sacred grove or any other thing, and then you say that it is a forest and you protect it under Wildlife Protection Act. That is when you take away the rights of these communities to protect, conserve, and be in the sacred groves. I hope that is absolutely clear. Now, what do sacred groves mean to communities? Now they are, see, it's not just the place to live. Okay? It is not just the place to live, but it is their entire life, because everything they are born, brought up, and they end up there itself, doing each and everything in that particular region. So it is more than just a land for them. Now, what are sacred groves? They are community regulated and community conserved. Community regulated and community conserved patches of land that are managed traditionally by these communities. So there is basically no state authority as such involved. Doesn't mean they are not aware. It is just that this system is being working efficiently. The protection of the environment, ecology, everything is there, and these communities are also leading a peaceful and happy life. Okay. Now, these communities who are there, they basically keep this place completely pristine, pure, and there is no violation of laws or any such thing which takes place. Plus, they have very strong ethos with them, which is linked with sanctity, which is linked with ecological conservation, which is linked with strict following of the rules. As I said, you don't even pluck the fruit. You may eat it only when it falls on its own. So that is the kind. So basically, it is very clear that they are not utilizing these groups for their economic benefits. Rather than that, they rather have devotion towards it. They worship it as well. There are rituals and culture related to it. Now, specifically for prelims, you should remember these names, which are the names of sacred grove. So Devara, one very famous movie recently which came. So it is known as Devara in Karnataka, Devban in Himachal Pradesh, Kavu, Sarp Kavu in Kerala, Darna in the Chota Nagpur Plateau region, central India, Devbani in Chhattisgarh, eastern India. Further, you have Jahera Thakuramma in Odisha, Devgudi by the Muria, Madhya and the Gonda Adivasis of Maharashtra and Chhattisgarh, and then Kilo, Lingdo, Kilo, Kintang and Kilo, Niam in Meghalaya, plus Sabarkantha, Dahad or Banaskantha in Gujarat. Now these are some names. There are so many sacred groves, and as a result there will be so many names. These are few famous important names that we have talked about over here. Okay, I hope sacred groves is clear. Now the Supreme Court has directed to notify as forest and reserve it as, name it as community reserves under the Wildlife Protection Act. So what are community reserves? Community reserve category, it was included in the protected area category under the Wildlife Protection Act of 2002, means the amendment of 2002 entered the category of community reserves, in addition to, of course, the national park and wildlife sanctuaries. Now community reserves are community or private land where locals are given some volunteering rights. They can volunteer, they can report crimes, they can notify, all those things, but the right is still held by the state authorities. So some amount of involvement will still be there, but presently over the sacred groves there is complete right. When it gets transferred as community reserve, there will be certain right to conserve the habitats, protect the flora, fauna, animals, flowers, etc. in their own traditional way, but overall commandment of the state government will be there. Now this is going to go completely against the Forest Rights Act. So it remains to be seen what the future holds for the sacred groves as well as the communities that are residing over there. Thank you.